So here's our mission. If you choose to accept it, is we're going to take 2 weeks and we're going to explore a story that Jesus told. And it's a father that has two sons. Now, one son is a rule maker and the other is a rule breaker. I'd like to see how you find yourself in the story. Which one are you? Most of you know which one I might be, but this is a reoccurring theme throughout Scripture. You have right in the beginning Cain and Abel, Esau and Jacob. Then you have in the New Testament Mary and Martha. Siblings are constantly not getting along, to let's say mildly. And so we're going to look at that in our story today. But let's back up. We're going to look at a story that Jesus told in the book of Luke, chapter 15. But we need to understand who it is he's talking to and why this lesson was important. So going back into the previous chapter, into 14, we see that Jesus was having dinner at a Pharisee's house. And he was, engaged in conversation. And as Jesus does, he takes the everyday situation and turns it into a lesson. And so the first thing that happened is a person was there with a disease, and Jesus asked them, "Is it right to heal on a Sabbath?" Well, nobody answered him. And apparently this was the Sabbath meal. And so Jesus healed this individual. Well, nobody said a word for or against at this point. But since they were eating dinner, Jesus had a story about dinners and hospitality and how you can be humble while entering into a person's house and letting them seat you where they would like to have you sit versus where you think you ought to sit. And then, again, Jesus used the story of how Christians ought to be the salt and how they can infect other people. Salt always makes everything taste better. And so that happened a few days before this story that Jesus is talking about. Might even been the night before, but the next thing it says, and crowds began to follow Jesus. And it said that in the crowds, it's important to know who was in the crowd. It specifically says that there's tax collectors there, which is interesting that it's in plural. So there's tax collectors, and then it says sinners, and then it said that there were other Pharisees. So maybe from the night before, Jesus let them know where they were going. And so these Pharisees are always there to see if they can find a way to trip Jesus up. They wanted to begin to be able to accuse him of various things. So Jesus began to talk to the crowd. Maybe he was on his way somewhere. Maybe he was just out on a street. But it doesn't say. It just said a crowd was following him. And so here is this crowd. And Jesus is taking an opportunity to talk to them about themselves. And so he told two different stories, one about a man who lost sheep and one about a lady who lost some coins. And the coins weren't that valuable, but she did take a lot of time to look for them because it was important to her. And in both of those stories, it ended in a celebration. They were so excited that they found what was lost, and they had a party thereafter. So that's the backdrop. So Jesus is still having this conversation with the tax collectors, the sinners, and the Pharisees. Now think of Pharisees too as those who were religious, those who were part of the church. And that has some connotation to us as well in our story. So after telling those two stories about the man and the woman, he launches off and he says, and there was a father. who had two sons. Now, right from the get-go, we know that the story is going to be about the two sons. And so for those who are listening, we're going to deal with the youngest son today, and we're going to deal with the oldest son next time. So the youngest son, we're going to call this one the rule breaker. And so it says in the story, and remember, Jesus does not give a lot of details. We have to begin to use our imagination and also our understanding of culture to begin to find ourselves in the story. And so Jesus said the youngest son, the rule breaker, came to his father and said that he wanted his inheritance. Now remember, the son would be about 20 years of age at this point. And in their culture, children could get their inheritance early as long as the parents had full use of the property and the assets until their passing. But in this particular case, the rule breaker was going against the grain, was wanting to have his inheritance right then and right now. And so the father, without any problem, gave to the son what he was asking for. And it took a few days to turn the property and the assets into hard, cold cash. And so, as Jesus continues with the story, he took his money and he went to a far, far away country, a distant land, and there he began to try to make a name for himself. The story says, Jesus says that he squandered his money. Now, we'll unpack that in a few minutes. But just know that the money that he had, the money that was for his lifetime inheritance, was gone. And about the same time that his money was gone, a famine came into the land. And that caused even further problems. One, he didn't have any money, and there was very little to be found anyways. And so he got to the point where he reached a level, we call it rock bottom, or the bottom of the barrel. But anyways, he reached that level where he went to a farmer. Now remember, he's from a farm, so he has background here. He knows what to do. And he went to this farmer who happened to be a pig farmer. Now again, seeing this young man as a rule breaker, this was breaking all of the Jewish traditions. Pigs were unclean. You didn't have anything to do with them. And so here he's reached such a level that he is willing to become unclean. In fact, it almost illustrates the fact that he is giving up his religious identity and becoming just as a Jewish person would not want to be, and that would be a Gentile. And so he's working for this farmer. And it's getting to the point where he is so hungry that even the food and the baskets that he's taking out into the field to feed the pigs is beginning to look good. The seed pods that are used in the most extreme situations for humans is now very appetizing to this rule breaker. To the point where it says that he was awakened. His mind became open to his situation. And Jesus began to tell of what was going on in the young man's mind. And the young man began to think, you know, even the lowest servant, the slave back home, has it much better than me. And that began to work into his psyche, and he began to ponder this. Here he is struggling just to eat anything. And he knows that while he's struggling at home, the slaves have a roof over their head and they have full stomachs. What could be worse than that? I mean, this is better than what he's got. So he decided, if I go home and if I tell my father that I'm willing to just be a slave, he hoped, he believed that his father would take him back. And so we're going to leave it as the story there that he decided to go home. So his heart is heavy, his stomach is empty, but yet there's probably a little lightness to his step that now he's got a plan to get out of the trouble that he was in. So I want us to take some time to unpack this story, to understand why it was that possibly he needed to leave, why it was important for him to leave. Not that he was just a child that wanted to act out. Well, let's first look at birth order, because birth order, I think, has some aspects to play in this. Let me read to you what are some characteristics of being the youngest son. So some studies would say that life would be quite easy for the youngest child. Characteristic traits of a young child are these: they are accustomed to being pampered, they expect service from others, they become an expert at getting what they want, often they are not taken seriously, and they have become a force to be reckoned with. Now, keep that in mind. They are a force to become reckoned with. They are creative, and they are risk takers. Often they make huge plans that do not work out because they are easily bored. And I would add to that that more importantly, they are inexperienced because of their age. So wouldn't that give us some ground for us to think about on this rule-breaking son? Now, this is a tad bit of a speculation. Knowing the culture and knowing what may have been happening, we don't know the age difference between the brothers, but we know that there is an older brother and a younger brother. And in the tradition of the Jewish people, the oldest son gets 2/3 of the assets of the father. The rest is divided amongst the rest of the siblings. But the oldest, which we know is the older brother here, gets 2/3. It could be because of the problems between the brothers that the younger brother decided that he needed to move away. He needed to establish himself. Now remember, they're creative and they're a force to be reckoned with. So he thinks that he has an ability to do something from the knowledge that he's already built up. He could go into business. Now, the speculation is that it said that he squandered his money. He could have squandered his money in developing various different business ventures. We don't know what he really squandered his money on, but we can anticipate that one of the reasons why he asked for his inheritance was to leave the family so that he could begin to build upon his own ideas. He wanted to begin to start anew, somewhere fresh, and also somewhere where he wasn't known. That's why he went to a distant land. And so that is part of the premise in him leaving, I believe. So let me read to you some of the things that he had left behind. Protection. He would have had a safe place to grow, to learn, and to develop. Leadership development is another one. He would have had the privilege to be mentored by his father, and if he was humble enough, really to be also trained by his brother in running a successful business. Education. Being the youngest, he would have provided for him the best opportunities to receive an education. Others in the family or servants were able to handle the chores. There was moral direction. Living at home within his father's household in a Jewish community would have given him ample opportunity to receive instruction on how to live according to God's laws and commandments. And here's the most important one I see is love. The prodigal would have had the receipt of unconditional love. This is evident as the Father embraces him later on, and we'll talk about that, and restores him to a proper place. We're going to talk a lot about application next time. But here's what I want us to begin to ponder. So often we see situations as black and white, and we see rule breakers in a bad light. We have traditionally seen the prodigal son as the one that went away and did bad things. Well, we don't necessarily know if what he did, like what he was accused of by his brother, is being bad. But what we do know is that he left, lost his money somehow, and I think in business adventures, and maybe a little loose living. Why not? You're 20. You're going to have some fun along the way. And so with bad decisions, he lost it all, had a situation, but here's the thing. No matter what situation he found himself in, he knew that he could come home. Lord, right now, I believe there are people hearing this that need to hear that no matter what they have done, they are not separated from you, but have an avenue where you love them so much that when they begin to turn around, you will be there with arms open wide. And so, Lord, help us as other people are on their journey of faith to give them a place where they can feel safe to begin their journey home. We put all of this into your Son's name. Amen. So if you're listening to this today, know that no matter where you have been, no matter what you have done, you can turn around and you can begin to travel home. And we're going to find out what happens in that story next week. God bless you.